All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Shouldn't be too bad tonight. We only have a few things to go through. It's more to get ourselves organized for where we're going to be this year. First order of business is to, even though it says April 22nd, I think it was the April 2nd meeting, to approve the minutes from the April 2nd meeting.
Make a motion to approve the corrected minutes issued on the 5th of April for our April 2nd meeting.
I'll second. Discussion? All those in favor?
Excuse me, who seconded that? Thank
Marshall.
You.
At this time, we want to kind of remember thank the members that are no longer on the board, and that's Sue Arcadia, who was on here served two terms on there. So we want to thank her for the time that she put in on the committee and the help that she gave us. And we want to welcome the two new members that we've got, Dana Disjardin and Steve Linne. So welcome to the committee, and hopefully we'll all have some good times as we go through. This time, I put on the table for election of chairman. So see if we'll have that set for the following year. So motion on that.
I'd like to nominate Rolf Olson.
Second?
Other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Steve Linne.
Is there a second? Not a second on that.
I'd like to move to close nominations.
Second.
All those in favor of closing nominations? Opposed? All those in favor of Rolf Olson for chairman? Opposed? Thank you. Okay. Well, the big thing tonight is to kind of look through the budget schedule to see if we've got any glaring conflicts on dates that are on there. The meeting dates that we have would be January 7th, which is tonight, February 26th, and March 25th. The other dates listed there are action item dates. Those are dates either that the select board is meeting to discuss something, or that Don is getting the information back from the heads that he can be sending out to us. But the actual meeting dates that we would have would be February 26th and March 25th. At this point, if something were to happen that we had to schedule on other dates, then we would agree on that. But is there any conflicts with those two dates that anyone has at this point?
Rolf, I'll ask a question tonight.
Yeah.
Perhaps if I'd read the ordinance that establishes the Budget Finance Committee, I might have prevented my question here, but I noticed that typically the selectmen vote on the municipal budget first, and then the Budget Finance Committee votes on it.
That's correct.
That is not intuitive to me that that's the way it should be, but is there a reason for that?
Yes. The reason for that is the Budget Committee does not have anything to vote on until it's presented to us by the selectmen. What we have done, is to go back in history a little bit. In the past, we had separate fact-finding meetings between the select board and the Budget Finance Committee, but the Budget Committee does not develop the budget. The Budget Committee gives a recommendation on the budget that is submitted to it from the select board. What we have done in the last number of years is combined the review meeting, where we had the department heads available and things like that, with both the selectmen and the Budget Committee, so that we weren't doubling up the time that the budget heads had to come in and give their information, and that way everyone was getting the same information. But we don't have really anything to act on until it's given to us by the select board. That being said, once that's given to us, based on the information that we've had and the hearings that, that we've seen and whatnot, we can recommend a different amount on any of the items. But we can't create a new item. That has to be given to us by the select board. So that's why that happens that way. Okay. Mike,
Well, I'd just like to extend an invitation. We meet again as a select board and talk about the budget and possibly vote on the budget on March 5th. And, I would invite anybody to come and attend that and participate in that meeting from a conversational standpoint as well, so.
Don?
Well, we're on the topic of meetings. Tomorrow evening, there'll be a Board of Selectmen meeting, as you know, where the Road Improvement Study Committee will make its report on the road system with financial recommendations for moving forward on that big capital item.
If you aren't at that meeting, it'd be a good one to look at, just so because it's my belief that or understanding that at least part of that recommendation is going to carry into this budget as far as the maintenance side. The actual new work would be in a future budget, just based on how timing and things will shake out. But there's things to go through before that's all said and done.
The PowerPoint is online at the Board of Selectmen e-packet location. I can also have it, if it hasn't been sent out already, well, of course you have it, you could send it out if you wanted to, or we could do that.
Because we're not live, I guess we can, we're a little bit more free to say, but I mean, the recommendation coming from that committee is twofold. One is at a level of where the ongoing maintenance figure should be, and then there's a recommendation for a bond for reconstruction work. That would be a 10-year bond. But the first payment on that bond wouldn't occur in this budget that we're reviewing. It would occur in the following budget. But it is money that we haven't seen in there before, as far as the bond for that, but we do have bonds that are retiring too, so, when you look at the overall blending, and where the rates are right now, it doesn't look as though it's a bad time to do it. Well, Charlie, I mean, all things considered, the fact that, we have to, where the roads are, where there are roads are right now, and where they'll be in a few years, and looking at it a little proactively.
Ralph, is that in the email that was sent out regarding the Board of Selectmen's chair guidance? Point 1 was increased appropriation for capital road improvement based upon the road improvement committee report. Obviously, you're talking about that piece of it that's not the non-bonded part, the maintenance part in point 1. And then point 7, I just had a hard time understanding it. Investigate bonding for capital improvement versus capital reserve budgeting to achieve maximum utilization of existing capital resources. Sorry to be thick-headed, but can you help me understand what?
Yeah, what they're talking about there is, there's two philosophies you can take as far as your capital items. That capital items being things that have, was defined as things with over a $5,000 value that had a life of exceeding 5 years. And two ways that you look at it is you either do some pre-planning and you set up the capital improvement plan, and then you're pre-funding some of that, and then you're moving that capital plan each year, either moving things out into it, out of it, or whatever. But you set up a kind of a guideline that says, here's what we know we're going to have to be buying over this time, so we can start accruing some money for that. The other option is to look at it and just say, okay, well, we need something, we'll bond for it and buy it that way. And so.
Essentially paying it for post facto
So
versus
it's,
pre.
you know, so it's a function of either prepaying or postpaying.
Okay,
You know, and which is the better approach, or is it a matter of blending the two together? So
So
that's what they're looking at
okay,
there.
and this was more the board, the chair saying, look at both of these versus saying we have an opinion now as to which one we prefer, which of those gas pedals. Okay, great, thanks. Thank you, appreciate it.
I mean, that's, you know, it's, yeah, Dana.
My question, Mr. Chairman, is there any reason why we can't meet as this committee between February 15th and February 26th? That's when 15th is when the town manager submits his budget to the Board of Selectmen and Budget Finance. I would like to review this budget amongst this group. That's, you know, I'd like to see that happen before we meet with the select board. I think a lot of, it would make for a shorter night actually on the 26th, in my opinion, and for especially new members, we could, you know, get a feel of what the rest of us feel on that budget without having any input from the select board.
I don't have a problem with that. The only thing that I would say is that you would not have available at that meeting department heads to answer questions.
That's fine.
As long as that's not an issue.
No, that's not
You know, I
an
mean,
issue.
the whole purpose of having that joint
Yeah.
meeting, you know, was because in the past, as I say, what would happen is we'd bring the department heads in, and
Yeah.
then they'd bring them in, and, you know, and we're trying to be a little bit, have a little consideration of where, you know, their
Yeah.
time too, because they put an awful lot of hours. So, I mean, I don't have a problem. The only thing we'd have to look at is whether, you know, whether we would have to be able to meet in the broadcast studio, whether that's available, or whether we'd have to make some other arrangement on that.
I guess my question is, why we need that meeting is, I'll ask this town manager, in the last two budgets have been pretty much status quo. Been no surprises. Are there any surprises coming up this time?
That's hard to project. What we have is now 6, maybe going on 7 years of a flat budget. We've essentially mined all of the low-hanging fruit, if you will. There's it's going to be a very, very difficult year. There's some new requests in there, but in terms of the substance of the budget, the format, it will look essentially as it has for all those years. And but the challenge is going to be to, and I don't know if this is where we're going to end up, but the idea of being LD1 compliant, and we've done that successfully for all those years. We've essentially held the budget flat. But that's going to be the challenge. I don't know how we're going to do that, frankly, because, you know, we've also eliminated the use of fund balance. We have adequate fund balance that could be utilized, but the selectmen don't want to do that. They don't choose to do that, and so we've eliminated that as a source. We bridged it last year with a one-time revenue. So we're starting in negative numbers, and everything in the world goes up in cost, and there are some new spending requests. So those are 3 definite challenges. But you know, will the budget look significantly different than it has in prior years? No. How will we deal with those challenges? I don't know yet. You know, how will we solve that? How close will we come to making it LD1 compliant? Will we make it LD1 compliant? That's the challenge of the next several weeks for the department heads and the town manager. So I don't know the answer yet.
Okay.
But there's a lot of challenges, and I would challenge anyone to show me a town that's basically done this, what we've done for all these years, or a budget that's done that. And so there comes a day of reckoning. We may be getting close to that.
If I may, I just would like to expand on one comment that Brian Walker made, specifically towards the performance goals, and why I would like to encourage each and every member of Budget Finance to come up with their own performance goals, because these goals, as you see set before you for this budget this year, are the performance goals of one member of the select board. It's the chairman. There was an exchange of some ideas, but I think if you compare, there was no consensus, there was no vote that represented the complete approval, if you will, of these performance measures by the select board. And if you compare them closely to the the goals that had been established and utilized for several years prior to this. The one significant change is we are no longer asking from this one, the board chairman, but one selectman's opinion, LD one compliance. That's no longer an overarching goal of these performance measures. I think that's a significant change. And if you go through and, if we had had a chance, or if I had had a chance to have this in an open discussion with the select board, so that I had seen what the chairman was putting out prior to, I probably would have had some of the exact same questions that this board is gonna have about the verbiage, the intent, the language, and the comparison, if you will, between previous goals and these goals before you.
Ralph? I just wanna point out that there was feedback from all the selectmen, opportunity to do that. Yes, the goals were aggregated by the chairman. There was no formal vote, but all the selectmen were invited to provide goals and feedback. And the reason that there was not a formal vote this year was that there was not time to do it, and so Mr. Gifford, who I wish was here this evening, aggregated those goals, and I think he would tell you that he took into account the goals that were submitted by all of the Board of Selectmen, and he tried to come up with a consensus set of goals. And as chair, this is what he came up with based on the feedback that he got from the Board of Selectmen. Now, certainly it doesn't represent every minority view.
I mean, at this point, I mean, it's like anything else. You have to have a starting point at some place, and so, that's a starting point, and you see where you see what comes in, and you see where things are going to shake out. I mean, that's part of why you have the forum where we have the department heads and things come in too, because they'll look at it. It's like you need to have some sort of a flow of information that goes back and forth, and you have to have something to start with. It's easier to throw darts at a board that's there than no board. So, so now the board's up there. There's a board up there, so darts can be thrown.
Just for clarification, these are recommendations. We're not bound to this. So in other words, when it says increase appropriation for capital road improvement, that's a recommendation. We're not required to actually increase funding for the roads.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make clear that they're just recommendations.
Yeah, the way that it works at the end is what will come out ultimately is a vote from is a warrant article from the select board, which will say for any of the given articles what amount should be raised and appropriated for X, Y, Z. The select board recommends X amount of dollars. From that, now the budget committee will look at that and make a recommendation, either the same, higher, lower, different, whatever. So that number, nothing's cast in stone until the annual meeting votes on it anyway. So what comes out of the selectmen, what comes out of this committee is a recommendation going forward onto that. And at the annual meeting, depending on how those are written, they can't be increased, they can be decreased.
There's a lot of trust though, Rolf, in the decision and the recommendation that the Board of Selectmen make, and not all people who go to town meeting are as well prepared to vote.
True.
I mean,
they're relying on the select board,
Yeah.
they're relying on the budget
Yeah,
committee
so, I mean,
to do their due diligence and do their reviews
Exactly.
and collect. I mean, that's why they elected us. So. Marshall?
I would assume two things. One, I read somewhere that we wanted a needs-based budget, or we were looking at a needs-based budget, and I assume that as we go through the vetting process, a need that's not on this list would present itself. I would hope that would happen.
What's happened is, for the past several years, the principal overriding goal has been to truncate this budget, press it down as much as we can, make sure that it's LD1 compliant. We achieved that goal. That's the overarching goal.
Right.
You know, fiscal responsibility, as I said, I would argue with anyone who says the town hasn't done that, we have. So what happens when you do that for a long, long period of time, which is what we've done, you end up with a number of areas and issues that perhaps should have been addressed, could have been addressed. And so the selectmen at some level are saying, we want, and they had said that last year too, but they still had the overarching goal, which was make it compliant. And we did. So the question becomes, you know, how do you do both? You can't exactly do both, so probably. So now we're going to see a slightly different approach. We're gonna try to keep our eyes on the ball, keep it as close to LD1 compliant, maybe LD1 compliant if some miracle happens, don't know, but also address these other issues that, like the roads and other things that really do need some attention that have had to take a back seat in the interest of trying to keep that tax rate as low as possible, flat.
Let me come back again a different way. I assume that these are fences built by the selectmen or built by the chairman. If we see something that's on the other side of the fence, I would assume that that would present itself appropriately so it could be discussed and either funded or not funded.
I think of them more as, hopefully more as guideposts than fences, but we try to stay within the guidance of these things, although there's a difference, as there are many things, there's a difference opinion on that. Some people see them as hard and fast, you've got to accomplish each and every one of these things.
Well, that's what I'm saying, I don't think we should.
Depends on who you talk to on that one.
Let me just make sure I understand where I think your question's coming from, because,
I have
it
nothing.
may have kind of a bearing on exactly how it can be answered, but, I think what you're saying is, inside of a budget item, there may be things that the selectmen don't put in there, and do we have the purview when that gets opened to change that? If that's the question, then yes, we do, because for example, if they come to us and
That's
says.
okay, I'm okay with that answer.
Okay.
I'm okay. As long as we have some kind of latitude to look outside to see if approve or not is a different issue, but just to look outside and see if we need to, if we choose to.
In fact, if you have ideas, if you think there are some things that we could benefit from, to send them to us now would be good.
Well, that'd be a good time to have that meeting in between, once we see the budget, and if we could think of something,
Now, I'm just looking at the
Yeah, it's a tough
calendar.
week. It's a tough week.
Is that
And-
school vacation week?
Yes, it is.
Because what you've got is, Dawn sends out on the 15th, that document to us, which is done electronically, so then we can get it that day. So it really says that, you're looking at putting a meeting sometime in the week of the 18th. And to be somewhat logical, you really wanna look at it for a day or so beforehand, so, it almost puts it in
How about the
a Wednesday, Thursday type thing in order to then to be ready for doing that next week for the
How
public.
about the day before we meet with the selectmen? That would be on a Tuesday, why don't we meet
The
on
selectmen
Monday?
meeting is Tuesday, so we could meet on the 25th. The question is, does that give recovery time if any questions come up there?
No.
No, but it would give us an ample chance to talk together and probably come up with some questions that we can ask the 26th. I mean, I think it's important that we meet as a group before the.
Well, that's what I'm
meeting.
thinking, it would be better off maybe the 20th or 21st, which is Wednesday or Thursday that
Yeah.
week before.
On the 26th, who chairs that? Is that a selectmen's meeting, chaired by the select board, or is that a budget and finance committee
Yes.
chaired by?
It's a yes.
Well, I think unfortunately, I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I think we're getting at, so I would, if that's gonna be a select board meeting chaired by the chairman of the select board, I feel less comfortable about not having a previous meeting.
Okay, keep in mind that that's not a voting meeting. That's an information gathering meeting. That is not a voting meeting. That's a meeting where we're there to gather additional information from department heads, from Don, from whomever it may be. we are not at that meeting making the decision.
Right.
So, Don?
Just a suggestion, but to me, if you're gonna have an extra meeting, I would think it would make more sense to have an extra meeting after you have the presentation and have information than to make one absent information. That to me doesn't make any sense. I would have it after you have the information and have the explanations, rather than try to form an opinion up front without the information.
Kind of depends on the purpose of the meeting. If the meeting is to get together, so if we get our collective heads together, what questions we wanna ask, then prior to the meeting, prior to the joint meeting works really well, because then we've had a chance to kind of get our own collective, the budget finance perspective, not from a decision standpoint or a point of view, but rather to kind of, what are the questions that we wanna ask? That, but Don, to your point, if it's more about kind of us forming a post-informed decision about how we wanna vote, then that's different. Although we really have a meeting to do that, cause that's our voting
That's
process.
our
It seems
voting.
like, in a way, it's really more us getting prepared for the joint meeting. Which could then hypothetically happen on that Monday if that vacation week's bad, because even though it doesn't give people a chance or time to respond, it's actually giving them an extra day to respond, because otherwise those questions would have come up at the meeting.
Well, yeah.
You're still kind of
Yeah,
ahead of the
those,
ball.
those department heads are not gonna be there.
Right, that's what and so what we would be doing is forming, okay, what other questions do we want from this department? What questions do we wanna ask tomorrow? What do we wanna make sure? So we're getting our tick list together as the budget finance committee, so when we get together with the board. So, that's just a thought.
Mike?
That would help us.
Ralph, I guess I'd follow up on Steve's earlier and follows up on Marshall's comment. Steve, you asked, is the budget gonna look the same? And I think Don answered that a little bit, but I don't know if everybody here knows that at our October select board meeting, we had a presentation from Public Works with kind of, looked into the future, and there was some capital needs there. Now, I don't know how the budget recommendation is gonna come down in the budget, but my hope is that as part of that discussion, we'll also talk about the requests that were made, or the overview that was given in our October meeting about upcoming needs of Public Works. I would hope that at that meeting on the 26th, we would hear maybe a budget and then about upcoming needs potentially of the fire department, which are our two biggest capital areas, and then we'd also have the information from the road committee. So I think this year's meeting on the 26th, even beyond what the budget is, I think you will have more information to think about, because even if we don't do it this year, I think it's gonna set the groundwork as we move forward, even into next year. Because we are gonna have to start doing some longer term planning that we may have put off. And I don't know, it goes back to Brian's question, bond or save money as it goes. So I'm hoping personally that we will have the budget and additional information from department heads at that presentation on the 26th.
Charlie?
Well, I would think we'd have, and we should, and it probably hasn't been the, nature of the history of this, is to have, a better understanding of the capital improvement budget overall, with schedules in advance. I mean, sitting at a meeting, a joint meeting of these two boards, and having for the first time laid out a 5-year capital improvement plan that hasn't been articulated and hasn't been, documented as to the need, especially if you're doing a needs-based, budget planning, especially on a 5-year cycle, which is the purview of the Budget Finance Committee. It's in the ordinance that you should develop and help work that CIP. And the CIP should probably, since we all know that both, Public Works and Fire have alluded to, a greater need in that area, that we'd have those figures well in advance of the meeting, by the department heads, that the town manager would have had vetted that and provided both, boards with the financial information, because that joint meeting is a programmatic, meeting, so to speak. The prior to that is the submission of the budget, which the reason why we're here in our capacities is that we're supposed to be able to understand the figures of the budget. That's the data we first initially need to work with. And so, I think the idea that budget finance, and that's what I was trying to encourage, is that you take your own lead on what you need to work with, because you're a separate elected board. And we've kind of blended the goals and objectives of both the select board and the budget finance over the last few years, and it probably hasn't had the separation that it really should have now.
If I'm hearing what Mike's saying, I mean, you know, that Public Works and Fire is looking at a CIP, which is more starting in 14-15, not 13-14.
Maybe. I don't think we know that until we see the information coming
You
forward.
won't know that until you start doing your research, which says, here's what.
Right, and I don't know what Dawn and the department heads are gonna put forth. All I know is we did have, over the summer, you know, Chief alluded to it, I think that's a good word that Charlie used. And then in October, we did have a presentation as to some upcoming needs. I don't know if those needs are gonna be in our proposed budget or not. But I think as we go forward, the question will be, how is it worked in?
Don?
To put this as simply as I possibly can, I mean, that sounds really nice to lay out, but the problem really has been that the overarching goal, so-called, has been to keep that budget as flat as possible. And so the way that you do that is you erode the quality of your programs. We've done that over a number of years. You eliminate programs, you make cutbacks, you combine positions, we've done all that, and you don't spend on capital. You get by with used equipment, you get by with no equipment when you can, you know, so that's what we've done. So I think the department heads are finally saying, and I'm finally saying, at some level, you know, we've done that, we've succeeded with that, but there's a limit to that. And so we'll come back with some recommendations and talk about objectives. But and we just now got the goal from the Board of Selectmen. There's still selectmen, I think, who would say that the overarching goal is that it not increase and that we not have any, you know, capital spending. So it sounds nice to talk about all that, but when you're not supportive of a program that would include the spending to make it happen, there's no solution. So
You know,
so
essentially
that's
we're-
the problem.
you know, essentially, we're at the point, you know, if we look back in history, we had a CIP that was in place 10 years ago, that looked out, that had that 5, 10, and 15-year planning in there. As we curtailed and curtailed and curtailed, that fell away and fell away and fell away, and we went to the budget by need scenario. So, you know, the question is, have we reached the tipping point where we now have to start re-looking and re-examine that? And if it is, then we need to reestablish that, and that means doing, you know, reevaluating where we are on all those capital items. You know, what is the replacement schedule, and, you know, is the replacement schedule, you know, does the replacement schedule say that it has to be new, or do we do you know, as we have done in the past, which is, you know, maybe, you know, with the fire equipment, finally used one that was, you know, was not beat up, but, you know, bought smart, not, you know, it's a question of buying smart and not just buying for the sake of buying, so.
And just as a follow-up, the town manager and I have fundamentally disagreed over this, the glass half empty, half full. He's presented, not only to the Board of Selectmen, but to this board and to other outside agencies, the glass is half empty. I've looked at it as it's half full. We've done a great job. We're looked at by other communities as how have we been able to accomplish such fiscal responsibility without that erosion of services. We have a new ambulance. We're sitting on a 2007 what is it, an Escalade or something out there. We've gotten a new grade. We've through surplus gotten graders. We put $50,000 into capital improvements on District 2 this year through the capital improvement budget. I'm not hearing from the public, and I think I've read in the notes over the last 2 or 3 years, other selectmen have made that same comment. We're not hearing this outcry from the public that our services have eroded. We put up flags on 302 and wreaths, and we we pretty much met the demand and the services, that have been required of a municipality, so I think it's a matter of, definition, if
Well,
you will, as
yeah,
to
I mean,
whether we're meeting our needs or not.
I know, but, you know, the fact of the matter is, we're at the time where, you know, you have to look at many things, and you have to look and say, okay, when do things make sense to do things and whatnot? And without doing the research, then you don't know. You know, and that's what we're saying is, you know, is it time to start doing this research and find out where we are? Because, you know, we have been lucky. We've been lucky that we found the equipment that we found, that we've had the people that have done a lot of things, and we've done a lot of things smart in this town that a lot of towns have not.
That's more like
You know,
it all.
and that's a big thing, you know, and, you know, but that doesn't preclude you from looking forward to see where you need to be and to plan to be where you need to be. And that's what we're saying we need to do. Don?
Just for the record, I wanna clarify that we have a used 2007 140,000-mile state police Suburban, not an Escalade, and I think Mr. Levitt knows that. We have a half dozen other used, call them if you will, mostly worn-out vehicles that we've been able to cherry-pick from the state of Maine and make do with. And I also take issue with the mischaracterization, I call it, of the half-empty attitude. I think that without the dedication of the town employees and myself to go out and make that extra effort to find that equipment, rehabilitate it, Nathan has spent countless hours on that, you'd be out of business when it comes to vehicles. So I take issue with that characterization,
Oh, we have a
mischaracterization.
new ambulance too, by the way, that's.
And as far as the
May I
reeds,
suggest
the
that
reeds and
we
the,
do a timeout on this, cause this
Yeah.
is just going back
Right.
and
I
forth,
would
and
like
it's
to-
not productive.
What I would like to suggest is, let's go back to the concept of another meeting. What's being new to this, what's the overall size of the budget, roughly?
3 million.
3 million. Personally, to ask me I don't know how late you guys wanna go on that night, but being an engineer, we could be there a long time. For me to go through a $3 million budget in one night, that's gonna be a long night to do, but I feel to do what needs to be done from a standpoint of my responsibility. So I think it would help efficiency. Really what Dana's suggesting is a pre-meeting so that at least we've had a chance to go through it and kind of illustrate the areas that we're concerned about.
Well,
Peter?
kind of following up on that, last year we spent quite a bit of time reviewing the current budget that was in effect at the time. That would mean that right now, we're halfway through the fiscal 13 budget. We spent some time with that, looking at why things were exceeded budget, why they were less than budget. That I found very useful for myself, because then I learned in doing that, because we were gonna take those same expenses and take them forward one more year, so. And we haven't really talked about that little exercise here, and that might take, perhaps an hour, but it was well worth that time. Nancy provides some,
No, you're talking about the
Appropriations.
appropriations reports that we get each month.
You guys get those?
yes,
Okay, cause I haven't got any yet, so.
Well, I've gotta talk to you about email.
I haven't gotten it either.
Let's see,
it's on the town website,
well, I'm trying to think, the last one that came out was
November.
November.
Okay.
But anyway, I still think that looking at the current budget that we're sitting in right now is useful.
Yeah, and
My
that's,
opinion, anyway.
and that's what the appropriation report does for you, is let you see where you are.
Yes, it does, but we need the verbiage that goes with it. Why is this what it is? If it's, I think Marshall asked questions on that a year ago, and I know I did, and Nancy and Don did a great job answering them. It was great education.
Well, it gives you, numbers that you can say, well, why an increase this year or why a decrease this
Right.
year. It's a good thing to have.
Alright, so we're, Marshall?
I think last year, for me, the process was pretty effective, where we received the budget and the 15th, we had a week to communicate questions, okay, develop and communicate questions, which for me, most of it was answered on the 26th. That was pretty effective. I'm not saying I'm opposed to a meeting, but I found that because then I could do it when I needed to do it. And the responses came back very quickly. It was fine. I don't know how the town management felt about that process, but to me, that was all right. There is an opportunity to
Okay, I
ask
didn't
questions
realize
before.
that.
the
Yeah,
meeting.
we like that actually, to have
Yeah.
the questions and to provide more information, that worked out really well. I know you post a number, I know Peter did, a number of people did, so as you're running through the budget and you have detailed questions, we like those. in
This
advance.
year I have already about 15 questions. Budget versus appropriation support, anything better than 5,000, anything better than 50%. That's my criteria, so I'm gonna lob those out to you when the time comes. I wanna go back and revisit an issue that we talked about. I'm hearing that this budget committee has a scope of 1 year, and we're not looking forward into capital improvements. We're not looking forward into Public Works buying a truck that won't impact this year's budget, but it may go forward and impact capital payments in years from here. And to me, I'm not comfortable with that, because that does not give us the authority to say no, if we need to say no, to a budget item that's already in place. And I'm asking if there's a vehicle or something that would allow the budget committee to look forward in years to these capital improvements that we're talking about.
Well, there's two sides of that.
Okay.
No financial issue goes to the town for a vote that doesn't have a recommendation from the budget committee.
When it involves 5 and 10-year funding.
That funding can't be, I mean, there's two issues that come into play. If it's in the capital improvement plan, the capital improvement plan is part of the budget package that comes, and that's laid out. But in order for them to go and vote on a bond, requires a vote by the town, which requires a recommendation from the selectmen.
I'd forgotten that part.
And
Okay.
from the selectmen as well as the budget committee. So it is anything that has a financial tag to it gets a recommendation from both the selectmen and the budget committee going to either the town meeting or a special town meeting. So any bonding is reviewed.
I'd forgotten the part about the town meeting. Sorry.
What I'd like to see, this year though, Rolf, Mr. Chairman, is, more, in regards to CIP, what the CIP is, basically gonna be used for. Is it gonna be used for specific items? And if you can you name those items, whether it's a vehicle or, a certain percentage for vehicles, a certain percentage for, repairs, especially, Charlie brought up District 2. I was not involved like you guys were with the budget last year, but, I mean, I don't remember at any time was there any repairs budgeted for District 2. As a matter of fact, District 2 was recommended to be closed by a committee that an organization that the selectmen hired. And I mean, I know they chose not to close it, but they're still spending money on that survey to see if regionalization will work. So after the regionalization vote was made, work proceeded on District 2, and at one point in time, District 2 was slated to be done away with. So, where does that money come from? I don't know. Like I said, I haven't had any of the reports, so it makes it hard for me to know that, but if they could be more direct on where they're spending that money in CIP, especially at the fire department and public works level, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, and that, you know, that certainly we can get, but, what happens too is the CIP has been whittled down over the years to its essentially, right now, covering the debt service on,
Yeah,
on a number of those
Yeah.
bonds on.
those are automatics.
The, new items, you know, then you run into the differential between maintenance and, you know, maintenance and or construction, if it, you know, and those would have, you know, those would.
Be nice to know.
Those would get delineated for us.
Mr. Chairman, about 7:10, Dana asked for a special, another meeting, we have not even got there yet. Can we finalize that? And then, it says here, review draft budget schedule, I don't know why we're talking about fixing fire trucks and rescue minutes at this point.
Okay, so if we go back to looking at the, let's say, you know, we have a choice of either, you know, from a logical standpoint, either the 20th, the 21st, or the 25th. It would be up to what people's schedules are, which would be more appropriate and easier for you.
25th works for me, we'll be here anyway for the next day, so.
Hopefully we can come home in between.
Yeah, it'll work for me.
25th work for
Right,
everybody?
right now, all three of those dates will be open.
All right, so we'll say the 25th.
Mr. Chairman, also, I'm wondering if we can take in part of what Peter was talking about in terms of also thinking, because the Board of Selectmen is looking at this on a very regular basis, I think some of us are probably, and we'll do all of our individual homework, but I think there's a real value, and maybe we can't do it on the 25th to have Nancy or Don come in, but is there a way to incorporate into that discussion, or I may be clouding the issue here, but the thought came in, is that an opportunity to very quickly go over this year's budget to date and kind of get an understanding of where we stand for a small piece of time prior to going into the new numbers?
Well, we can get the appropriation report for, you'll have the December done when?
You have January.
You'll have December and January.
Yeah,
Before
it's just, what I'm thinking is that meeting is, I think it's a great opportunity, it's a great idea that Dana had of getting us much more kind of up to speed and ready for the 26th. And I'm just thinking Peter's point about kind of also understanding, okay, where do we stand today? Might be something to incorporate that. And again, maybe we're trying to do, maybe now we would be biting off more than we could chew in that one meeting. Just a thought.
I mean, the other thing that we need to discuss is questions that people have. What the best way to handle any questions is to email those to me, which then I get immediately to Don and Nancy. And the reason that I say that is not to be the gatekeeper per se, but really to be the gatekeeper, because that way I can make sure that they're getting the answer, but then as soon as the answer comes, I send that out to everyone in the committee so that everyone in the committee is getting the same information. They're seeing the questions, they're seeing the answers, so everyone is getting the same inputs as they come, so.
I think that process worked great last year. It was really effective, and the town was extremely responsive in their answers, so. We should do that in addition to this meeting, and it's not in lieu of.
Oh, no, it's not in lieu of,
Yeah.
but it's certainly, you know, what we did also is, you know, at that meeting, we then reviewed all those questions that had come through, because what that does also, when we have an official meeting, and then we go through those questions and answers, that becomes part of the public record also. So it's because part of our deliberations, that, you know, that goes there, but that way, we know that, you know, I know that everybody here is getting the same information. You know, whereas if someone's going in and asking a question, they're getting an answer here, and not necessarily everybody on the group is getting it. So I want us all to have the same information and deal from the same information. Any problems or questions on that?
Works well.
Yeah, that's great. So that's the 25th at 7?
Yes.
And
Place to be determined?
Place to be determined, because I'll have to check with Danielle to see if we'll be here or there. 'Cause Vegas, that's the third week, which I can't remember if that's a planning board night or not.
Planning
Generally,
board's on Wednesdays.
General Appeals Board is the fourth Monday, so you may be able
That
to.
following Mondays. But, I mean, I'll let people know.
That's the fourth Monday.
Louise, can you forward Ralph my email?
I better talk to you because it bounced back.
It's just like my checks.
Not yet.
All right, so,
That'll be next.
are there other questions on what we're doing and where we're going? Okay, not,
Good.
Good to go.
we're all set to go, and we'll see people on the 25th.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
In favor?
Beat you to it.
Alrighty. Thank you.